but you can't grant a copyright, just like you can't give a baboon a copyright or a camera a copyright. You can't give artificial intelligence alone a copyright.
Welcome to Imagine Creativity Through AI Art. This week, I chat with copyright lawyer Michael Kahn about the U.S. Copyright Office's latest AI inquiry. We dive into photography history, Naruto's famous baboon selfie, and what it all means for the copyright of AI-generated art. Michael, welcome to the show. We're going to talk about copyright today.
It's a pleasure to be here, Jen.
And I really, I contacted you because the Copyright Office has put out a notice of inquiry requesting comments about AI. And I'm hoping that you can help me get some perspective on copyright and AI, sort of what has led up to this document that the Copyright Office has put out, and sort of maybe some background. And where do you think the Copyright Office is coming from?
Sure. And, it actually helps to start going back to the Constitution itself.
Okay.
There is what's known as the Patent and Copyright Clause of the Constitution, in which the founders said that they would give Congress the power to promote. That's a key word, to promote the progress of science and the arts by giving inventors and artists an exclusive right in their works for a limited period. So that if you were an inventor and you were able to get a patent, that patent would give you an exclusive right, a monopoly on your invention for a limited time. Back then, and still today, it's 20 years for patents. Okay. For copyrights, it used to be 14, now it's over 100 years. But again, it's this whole notion of giving an incentive. And that has played out in two ways over the years. One way is that courts have decided the only living things that can get a copyright and own it are human beings. And there have been, over time, fascinating cases involving animals in which people were trying to get the animal a copyright. And my favorite of the more recent ones is the so-called baboon selfie. And this one was about 10 years ago. A photographer, someone like you, Jen, and your crew, he was in Indonesia, and he was filming in the wildlife, had his camera set up on a tripod, and he left the camera equipment for a moment. I don't know if he went to the bathroom or went to get lunch or had a quick meeting or took a phone call, but when he got back, he was surprised to discover that a baboon, there was a tribe of baboons, but this was, I guess, the leader, the baboon had taken the camera, was staring at it, and the photographer kept hearing clicking noises, which was telling him that the baboon was taking photographs. Well, he gets back from Indonesia, he has the film developed, and to his amazement, he has this phenomenally evocative baboon selfie, which your listeners and viewers can now look at. Well, he posted this baboon selfie online, and believe it or not, PETA, the People for the Ethical Treatment of Animals, they sued him for copyright infringement in the name of this baboon, who I think they named him Naruto, and they tried to get a copyright for the baboon so the baboon could earn royalties. And the case went up to the Court of Appeals, and the Court of Appeals, going back to that original copyright language in the clause about incentivizing humans, said, no, baboons don't count. The only animals that can get a copyright are humans. And so the baboon lost. Slater sort of won. Nobody's got the copyright because it was a photograph taken by an animal, but Slater owns the film.
So I was going to ask, did that give the photographer copyright? And
no.
You're saying no, it did not.
No, because that was not something created by a human. So that's part of it, but the other part is a machine. And a lot of copyright over time, over the last 200 years, it's been kind of fascinating, is the courts and the Copyright Office keep struggling to figure out how to pour new wine into old bottles. And I'll give you one of the earliest examples were photographs. In the 1800s, as photography got to be a bigger thing with the photos from the Civil War and other photos, the photographers were trying to get protection in the form of copyright for their photographs. In the early days, the courts were saying, no, these are not created by humans. Says, all you got here is this machine. You look through it and you push a button, and then you go through some other processes, and all that you've created is an image of what was on the other side of the camera, an image out there in reality. So you can't get a copyright. This is something created by a machine.
Okay, so we as photographers, since that's my background, we didn't automatically get copyright protection.
No, you
that
didn't.
Came later.
Yeah, and it came in the Supreme Court in an opinion by Oliver Wendell Holmes Jr. in around 1895, in which he basically pointed out that yes, the images that you are photographing, let's say that you're out in the woods and you take a photograph of a deer. You don't own a copyright in that deer. And you don't own a copyright doesn't cover ideas. So you don't own a copyright in the idea of a deer in the woods. But he said the artist is adding certain elements that the artist is choosing: lighting, angle, composition. It's not just the deer, it's the deer standing behind a tree or whatever. And he said, okay, so that there are certain things that are out there in the world and they're in the public domain. Anyone can take a photograph of a lighthouse. I take a photograph of a lighthouse, and then you decide to take a photograph of a lighthouse. I can't sue you for infringement saying you stole my idea for taking a photograph of a lighthouse, because you can't protect ideas. But your version of the lighthouse that you got in your sunset at a certain angle with the moon out there, you own all of those elements.
And even if I kind of lucked into it, like I showed up at a certain time and I didn't know some, I don't know, flock of birds was going to be there, and they made the place magical. Even if I didn't set it up that way.
Exactly.
Okay.
In fact, as you know, as a photographer, particularly natural things, many of them are really spur of the moment. You've got the eye. You've been with photographers. They have an eye. I mean, we've all seen this. I've been to exhibits of photographs, and I've seen photographs of objects that I've seen myself with my eyes, but I never saw them in the way that photographer did, with whatever the angle was in the background and the lighting. I know that, I think it was last month, I think it's the annual thing, the blue moon.
Oh,
What it's called? You know, we have this giant moon.
Yeah.
And there were so many amazing photographs that I saw, you know, reproduced in newspapers and magazines and online. And again, you know, the photographer doesn't own the moon, doesn't have a monopoly in the moon or the moon over a particular building, but the photographer figured out whatever the angle was, waited for that moment, took that photograph, and the courts have said, yeah,
that's enough.
That's enough. You've got the angle, you've got the lighting, you've got the composition, you've got these elements, and that's enough.
And it's okay. I mean, I photograph with a gentleman who's very, very experienced, and we will go to the same place and photograph what is seemingly the same thing. And then I see his prints and go, oh, no, well, I didn't see that at all. I mean, my images look completely different. So, yeah.
No,
and they're okay. I mean, I have the copyright protections on my image, and he has them on his image, but they're completely different images, even though they were taken at the same time.
Yeah. And
Same time,
frankly, if
same
you
place.
both took them at the same time and they came out the same, you'd each own a copyright in your version.
Okay.
You know, that's it, and it's that same concept actually in the world of literature and motion pictures. There have been writings that I've read with fascination that in all of world literature, there are only 7 plots. And there are these 7 basic plots.
Okay.
Well, it's like that's like the deer and that's the deer and that's the blue moon, and it's a couple other things. But each artist, each author, each film director may do his or her version of what is that essential plot. And there's certain basic elements. I mean, if you're making a crime movie, there's probably going to be a chase scene. You can't copyright the idea of a chase scene. You can copyright your version, but every version's different. If there's a spy movie or a romance novel or a rom-com, they're basic plot elements, just like for photography, there are basic things out there, but each person owns a copyright in their own creation. But that sort of brings us to AI because we
Okay.
had the courts 150 years ago struggling with, wait a minute, how do I separate the human from from the pushing of a button and this film getting exposed to now AI, which is, it's the Copyright Office and the courts, and frankly, the artists are all struggling now with, what is sufficiently human created, like the sufficiently human created photograph, even though you're using machines, what
Mhm.
is sufficiently creative from the human that we can protect it with a copyright?
So in some ways, we've kind of struggled with this before in the photography world, but the machines that we're talking about here are not equivalent enough to just say, oh, well, we've done this before, just do the
Right.
photography thing. We figured out the photography thing, but now this is different. So we can move into some of the differences on what makes AI machine different from a camera machine. And the person controlling the camera is different from the person prompting the AI.
No, yeah, absolutely. And it's, you know, there's no real easy answer here, which is why the Copyright Office, which has been struggling with this issue now for a year or two, and they've watched courts struggle with it, are finally saying, okay, everyone, help us out here. Help us figure out what types of creations that involve the artificial intelligence have enough of this human element, going back to our baboons, have enough of the human element in them, in the creative process, that we can grant a copyright to that person. But you can't grant a copyright, just like you can't give a baboon a copyright or a camera a copyright. You can't give artificial intelligence alone a copyright.
Right. So they've put out this call, and let me just share it on the screen here. I am sure hoping that you can help me make some sense of it. Just in general terms, like what is the Copyright Office hoping to gain? The feedback
And
they're
you'll
hoping
see
to
that
get.
as you go down, there are dozens of questions they want people to comment on.
Oh, yes, there are just question after question. So I'm just going to scroll through this just to give folks an idea of
Oh yeah.
the types of questions. And we can target a couple of these if you think they are something we can dig into. But they're asking all sorts of questions.
Yeah. I
Are there
mean,
any
they are
questions?
struggling with this, Jen,
Are there
as
any
we all
questions
are.
in here that you think sort of really get to the heart of what they want to know?
All right. So you're now scrolling through the question.
Yeah. I think what there's 30 something.
Yeah.
You can see just, and I'll put a link to this document in the show notes. So folks want to look at this and read through and see, exactly what kinds of questions the Copyright Office is asking. And it's wide-ranging document. We're talking mostly about AI image generation today, but yeah, this goes off on all sorts of different AI systems.
Yeah, and all types of artists now are freaking out over this. I'm a member of the Authors Guild, and the Authors Guild has just filed a big class action against a bunch of these AI entities, which have been openly, they say, training their computers by downloading literally tens of thousands of works of fiction. And so that's the kind of mundane question, which is if you're copying stuff, because one of the exclusive rights that you have as a copyright owner is the right to make copies. Is that an infringement? The mere fact that they're downloading, all these books, not purchasing them, but downloading them, but then they're using them, and we can talk about it in the art area as well. They claim to be using them to educate their computers. But the big concern that the authors have is then they will have the computers, if you're John Grisham or Scott Turow or whoever, you can have a computer now, let's create a legal thriller in the style of John Grisham. And the early versions may be ridiculous. I've seen some of these early versions of just essays and stuff. You'll read a column because they were one of the op-ed writers for the New York Times was quoting from his attempt in one of these chatbots to have them write some sort of op-ed piece from him on some topic, and it did a really lousy job, although it did a great job of sounding like the author.
Right.
So that's just in the area of the written work, where there's now this class action that's proceeding, and you've got then the motion picture industry, which went out on strike in part over AI, for the fear that all of these writers in the writers' rooms were going to be replaced by AI that could do the plots for the next, whatever, Breaking Bad or whatnot. So yeah, there's lots of concern out there by the artists, and there's lots of concern out there by, people working with AI who feel that they're being treated the way, as we were talking 120 years ago, photographers with their cameras are being treated. That, no, that's just a machine. You can't have a copyright in that. But I mean, I will tell you, I wish I had a better grasp of these issues, Jen. I mean, we can go talk about some of these questions and we can, these get really complicated. And for someone like you, who's a photographer, they could download all of your photographs and then create something new.
And then just say in the style of. Yeah. And that I think, if I'm understanding this correctly, a lot of the cases currently sort of in the process of being litigated are about these training models. So they're not looking at sort of me, the creator, yet. They're more looking towards the companies and saying, how did you train this? Are you allowed to do it this way? Have you infringed on copyright by doing the training data this way? Is that correct?
That's correct. And so the people that feel really threatened are the professional artists who are worried, and not so much the gallery artist with his or her photographs or his or her paintings, but it's the people whose livelihood counts, requires making this art, and there are all kind of people in that realm. I was reading today that the video game actors are now going out on strike.
Okay.
And you're thinking, wait a minute, video game actors? I didn't know they were actors in video games. But then you realize, as you look at these video games, whether it's Sims or whatnot, yeah, it would be very easy for a sophisticated AI to get rid of these actors. And the fear among writers that went out on strike is that they're going to get eliminated from the writers' room when, the producers of TV shows realize, my God, we can save a ton of money. We can have that we've now downloaded, I don't know, 700 episodes of Seinfeld. We can now create our own comedy and have them just take those kind of jokes
In the style of Seinfeld.
in
Yeah.
the style of Seinfeld. Our novels in the style of John Grisham, or our news articles in the style of this. So we are right now at the threshold, which is why I'm glad that the Copyright Office has sent this out. And it will be fascinating, Jen, as these answers start coming in, because they're going to be coming in from all of the industry. The authors,
it's pretty widespread. Yeah, it's pretty widespread.
Yeah, on both sides. It's and both sides. When I mentioned earlier that how the copyright term, which originally 150 years ago was 14 years, it's now like the life of an author plus 70 years. But the main issue was with the corporate copyrights. And 20 years ago, it was the so-called Mickey Mouse Amendment to the Copyright Act, which extended the term of the copyright for another 20 years. And as one of the opponents pointed out, it got enacted a year before Mickey Mouse, the character, went into the public domain.
Oh, okay.
But the point here being that some of the players who are going to be very active in answering these copyright questions will be the film industry, the book publishing industry, all these companies that will see major opportunities financially to be able to start getting rid of some of these human artists and start using AI. So it's a big time right now. It's not Picasso who is concerned, or the modern Picasso. It's all the artists who are kind of down there in the sand pits making their living, doing art, doing photograph, doing doing video game, doing all this stuff, which is why I think we both agree it's important that the Copyright Office is going to try to bring people together to say, all right, you tell us, where do we draw the line between what a human is instructing this computer to do and what the computer is doing, and is it sufficient human involvement that we can say it can be covered by copyright? And it's sort of going back to the original camera stuff. All right, fine. So you're pushing a button, you're aiming this, that, but you're the one who is directing that camera with the lighting, with the angle, with the composition. And it's an attempt now to try to parse that out. We never had to deal with it before.
Yeah, and it is really the parsing that there's sort of needs to be a line drawn at some point in the sand, because the whole idea of a person making an image, okay, we understand that, and a machine completely making an image without any human intervention at all. If a machine's just churning out random images without really a human saying anything about it, that's one thing. But there's a lot of space in between those two places, where a human is creating something and the machine is helping. where does that line draw? I mean, coming in from photography, we've had AI for a long time in terms of, Photoshop, content aware fill. All of our post-processing has some sort of AI in it. We do sky replacements. That's very common practice to do sky replacements. That's AI. So, in my world of photography, we have actually grown up with some of this basic AI. And it really is when we hit generative AI, where the AI can generate something completely from whole cloth, that we really now are struggling. Is that a fair way of saying it?
I'm thinking of your sunset example. There could be enough input in some version from you.
Okay.
Telling the computer, here's what I want. I want a camel here. I want this sand dune, and I want this, and I want, telling it enough that you're doing what a photographer with that camera is doing. You're just now getting help in pre-production as opposed to post-production. But it's all your ideas and your contribution. I think that's something that should be protected by copyright, but maybe that's the easy example.
And
but
that will
right.
probably,
Photoshopping now. I mean, I'm not sophisticated like you, but I've taken enough family pictures on my iPhone that I then crop them. I change the lighting. I do these.
You take out that person in the background who's photobombing your picture. Yeah.
Yeah. And so, AI is helping me do that, but I'm doing it.
And I tell you what, I use a fairly high-end camera, and I'll tell you what, my camera is helping me an awful lot. With all the AI in the cameras these days.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I think that there is going to be a spot here where AI can be a major assistant to the artist, but nobody really knows where that is right now.
Right. And we have a case. I'd like to bring up this case of this comic. So my understanding is this comic book is kind of the test case that came up. I believe it was in December or November of 2022. Did you follow this story?
No, you know what? It's fascinating. I remember reading about it, but I didn't actually see the images that you've got here.
My understanding, and again, correct me if I'm wrong, is that the author of this comic book put in for a copyright claim for this comic book, and the copyright office initially gave copyright, if I'm understanding things correctly, and then later turned around and said, but the images are all Midjourney images. And so we will grant you copyright for the text and for the placement of the images in the text, but not for the images themselves. So this was a case where they initially said, okay, let's do it, and then sort of pulled it back and parsed out what was going to be copyrightable and what was not going to be copyrightable.
Yeah, I mean, it's fascinating. This is one version as they're struggling to figure out what we're going to do, what we're going to cover. So your understanding is the actual images
are not copyrighted. Not copyrighted.
They pre-existed and the computer put them in there.
Yeah. So none of the images you're seeing now, is my understanding, none of these are copyrighted. They were made with Midjourney AI, but the Copyright Office did grant the artist the text, the look of the text, the font, the placement of the images in the text. So my understanding is that part of this comic is copyrighted.
It's interesting. I mean, I've represented comic book artists in pre-AI periods because there's usually a writer and then there's the artist and they work together and they end up with this what's known as a joint copyright where they're both co-owners unless there's some contract there. So this is interesting. It's not a joint copyright because the Copyright Office say no, all these illustrations There's no copyright for them,
Right.
which is very strange.
So this is the line in the sand that they're trying to draw, correct? They're trying to
Well, it's
find.
a weird line in the sand because I suppose it means someone else could come along and reproduce all the images, presumably in that order, and then write their own comic book. No, I mean, that's why this has got to be sorted out.
Yeah. See, and
Really.
that's my understanding now. And I think that's why, especially image generators, we're very interested, those of us creating images, because we create these images and say, I create an image and put it on a t-shirt and I sell these t-shirts. And Midjourney doesn't seem to have any problem with me doing that. There's language in their terms of service to say, basically, go for it. But even though they allow me to make money off of the images, anyone else could come along, take that same image, make their own t-shirts or whatever, and that's perfectly fine too, because I don't own the copyright to that image.
So Midjourney charges you for the use of the images?
There's licensing language if you are on one of the payment options. So if you pay a subscription, there is sort of a licensing licensing language to make it okay, because lots of people are making money off of their Midjourney images. And my understanding, except for Adobe, most, I can't say all of the AI generators that I've played with, but most of them that I've played with all have some sort of language in there that makes this okay, that it's okay for commercial use. Adobe was the holdout, and they're just now pulling back on that, I think, and allowing people to use the products for commercial use. Yeah.
And there's some sort of paywall where you need to pay to get access to. All right.
Yeah. Yeah, if you're on a subscription, so any sort of free service that you would do through Midjourney, the free generations weren't protected. They didn't give you this license. Yeah, but it also meant that anyone else could see that image and use it for whatever.
Yeah, because it's not protected by copyright. It's only protected by contract.
Right.
So that's a good option for them now, at least those who go behind the paywall.
Mm-hmm.
You can have an enforceable contract that says you can do this, you can't do that. But you're right. If there's no copyright, someone else comes along.
Right.
And they can't say you're infringing our copyright because there's no copyright.
Right. So, I mean, the first question was always, can I use this product for my own commercial use? And in almost all of the AI generators I've seen, that is the case. You can use the images created for commercial use.
Which makes sense.
Yeah. So, I mean, they're incentivizing you to, get the products out there, and they're okay with you using them to make money. But that doesn't stop anyone else from using your images to make money either. This image here, which got a lot of press because it won a major, well, I don't even think it was a major, it won an art competition. And it was one of the first images to be shown to win one of these art competitions that was created through an AI. And so this is a Midjourney image. There's a lot of press about it at the time. And I believe the artist then applied for copyright and was denied copyright.
Right.
And so I guess my question would be, is there any way that this artist could demonstrate human involvement? Because obviously he's prompting the image.
I mean, it's a great question, Jen, because it's a beautiful, powerful work of art. And it's also, I think, part of what the Copyright Office is trying to get at, which is how do we draw the line between what the human is contributing and the machine is contributing? And, it'll have to be, I mean, it could gum up the process, but for something like this, you might have to provide, if that's what the Copyright Office decides, detailed evidence of your involvement, which, it's going to be a deterrent for somebody trying to get a copyright until you have clear guidelines. I mean, that's been, without clear guidelines, going all the way back to the Constitution, it's hard to incentivize artists to spend all this time working with AI, but maybe working in a very creative, active way, and then being told, yeah, but you know what? The odds are even this phenomenal creation, anyone can copy it. Put it in a t-shirt, sell it to a museum, put it online, blah, blah, blah. Until those lines get drawn, it's it's not just cameras. I mean, this has happened over and over in the world of copyright. And with each new invention, those who are affected saying this is the end of our art form. I remember reading an article about the invention of player pianos, which was back in like the 1910s. And this is before radio. So if you think about it, and if you wanted to hear music in your home, up until then, the only way you could do it is you would buy a piano and then you'd go to a music store and buy sheet music. And that was where all the money was made in what was known as the publishing industry. And when the player piano was invented, the music industry went crazy, said we're going to be destroyed because now no one's going to buy our sheet music. And then they invented the record player, and then they invented the radio. And each new invention was the end of music, but then they adapt, and that's the hope here. Is that with AI, we're going to adapt. Copyright Office and the people answering it are going to help us find a way that humans will be able to work with AI in such a way that the resulting creations can be protected by copyright. That there'll be enough human involvement that it won't be the baboon who found the camera and took the pictures himself. It'll be Mr. Slater, the photographer, who got the baboon over there and took a picture of the baboon. And that's the hope here.
Yeah. So
I mean, I wish I could give you more clarity now.
We're so
I don't. I'm as curious as you are to see what's going to come pouring into the Copyright Office. So hopefully this will get figured out. We're at the front end of this. We're right now trying to convince judges that that the camera is not a machine that's making these photographs on its own, that there are photographers involved. And now it's 120 years later, and we're dealing with the same thing.
Do you have any idea of, where the future might go with this? What they're thinking about? Or are they just collecting data right now and just trying to make sense of it?
I think it's more the latter. I think they feel they're now in over their head, that the technologies race beyond them, and they now want input from the experts to help them figure out your example, the guardrails and the requirements for people to seek copyright protection, which is incredibly valuable, but they don't want to give it out then to non-humans. And so it's that, is it the photographer or the baboon? And
but right now I'm kind of feeling like the baboon in this scenario.
Yeah.
because we've just sort of gone and prompted some things, and I guess we're now the baboon. So because we're not allowed copyright for our images.
Right. And
yeah,
I know. And so, I mean, you're going to have all the different industries and the artists weighing in, and hopefully It'll be fascinating as we watch this get sorted out and hopefully come up with some clarity that we didn't have before in all realms of art.
Okay.
There's been something about humanity. We respond at some important level, whether it's music, or paintings, or photography, or a novel, or a play that reaches and touches us. And so I think this too, we're going to figure out how we can continue to enjoy this stuff and have it available, but in a way that's not going to eliminate the artist. And let's hope that's the case when you and I circle back again in 3 years and are talking triumphantly about how this has all worked out.
Well, I'll tell you what, when the Copyright Office sends out a report, I'll reach out to you to help me understand it yet again.
I'll be trying to understand it myself.
Trying to understand it. Great. Well, thank you, Mike, for joining us and really just giving us some perspective on the issues surrounding the copyright and AI image generation. Yeah, it's a little bit complicated.
It's a brave and scary new world.
It is. It is. And I will talk to you soon.
Take care.
Thank you so much.